going to be back up at 6 o'clock in the morning for the airhead. Now the airhead is, I don't know if this is an official term, but that's what we always called it. There was a little airstrip island type thing somewhere, and I've never been able to find this on a map, and maybe I'm not supposed to say where it's at, so we just call it the airhead. But it's a fairly large runway, and there was a flight line and some logistical buildings where you know, hangars and warehouses and so on. And so we would get there, we'd fly our 2 helicopters, the ship would be within maybe half a mile of the beach, and they would sit there at anchor usually. And we'd jump on the helicopters and we'd fly in, and the helicopters would do a couple flights back and forth because we'd bring all of our gear with us every time. And so we'd get set up, and usually by the time we were set up, which consisted of, you know, we had probably 6 of us that were on the air deck that were there, and then the ship crew had their cargo guys that were there, and then there was forklift drivers, and we actually would bring our ship's cook with us to help, you know, cook us some lunch when it was time for lunch, and that was kind of nice. They actually had a really good setup there. So it'd take a couple helicopter trips back and forth to get all of the gear that we needed. And then what would happen is one of the Air Force cargo planes, like there was a C-5, there was C-141s, and sometimes some of the C-130 big old turboprop planes, they'd come in. And so the Air Force, they'd have their big cargo pallets, which if I remember right, they were like 12 feet wide by 12 feet long. It's a great big square steel pallet. And so these pallets would come off the cargo planes, and they'd have their big forklift go pick up that pallet and bring it over to our cargo mates. And the cargo would get broken down out of these big cargo pallets and then sorted, and every box had labels to what ship it was going to, or what, you know, division or department or whoever the people were that were getting it. So they would start looking at it, and so there would be all of these signs that the ship's carpenter had made, where it was just, you know, big signposts, and they'd have, okay, the name of the ship, so like USS San Jose, or our ship was the USS Kilauea, or sometimes they'd have aircraft carrier names, so, you know, whatever the aircraft carriers that were there then. And each of the ships in the Marine Amphibious group, they all had ship names, and so we would say, okay, these are all going to that. And so they would build up pallets that were specific to each ship, and so every time Kilauea cargo would come, and they'd build it up to a pallet, and when they get the pallet full, they'd wrap it all up in the cargo nets and then weigh it. And we could only lift about a 3,000 pound lift, and so they had to make sure that the lift wasn't more than 3,000. Well, sometimes you'd end up with a bunch of 500 pound pallets, and so we could take 6 or 8 pallets and kind of band them all together with the cargo nets. And so you'd have all these different cargo nets, and you'd hook up there as, like, you know, the net would come together, and you'd kind of weave it all up, and then you'd have there was a leg of like a cargo strap, and you'd hook that on there, and then you hook a pennant onto the leg, and the pennant was like a 10-foot long strap with a big loop on the end, and there was a piece of PVC pipe on it that you would use for a handle. And so you'd have all these things hooked together onto one long pennant, and so you'd say, okay, this group of pallets is within 3,000 pounds. And, you know, we'd move as heavy of a load as we could every time, just to cut down on how many loads you'd have to move. But, you know, we'd be flying all day practically. And so you'd be sitting out there, and then the helicopter would come in, and we'd take turns doing this. And so one of us was sitting there holding this pennant, and you're trying to stand still with your arms up over your head as high as you can, holding this long pole. And, you know, you can imagine, you know, taking something like a push broom and holding it up and try to hold it still in a windstorm, and the wind is going everywhere, and this thing is just whipping all over, and you're trying not to, you know, break the antennas off the bottom of the helicopter. So you've got, you know, the helicopter comes in, does a big flare, knocks you back a step usually, and, you know, you're just trying to hang on, and it does its little turn. And meantime, you got the air crew in the back of the helicopter where the cargo hook is. There's actually a hole in the floor, and so what they would do is they would lay on their stomachs and look down through the hole, and they got their headsets on, and they would be talking to the pilot to tell him, okay, go left 2 feet and forward 1 foot, or, you know, whatever, so to kind of line us up. And they'd get about stopped, and then I'd reach up with the pennant and try to hit the hook. Well, it's, you know, kind of hard when everybody's moving in different directions. So the aircrew guys would reach their arms down and kind of help you grab it and then slap it on the hook. And once it was on the hook, you'd run and get out of the way. And as soon as you were clear, the aircrew guys would be saying, okay, runner clear. And then the LSE person, the director, she'd start, you know, doing up signals. And as soon as they got it up and clear, then they'd give her, you know, like a salute and a point, and then from there the pilot was on his own, and he'd just, you know, pull up on the collective and just whoosh, and here's, you know, 3,000 pounds of cargo swinging around nets underneath the helicopter. Well, you know, it took me probably 3 minutes to explain that, but we were doing hits every 30 seconds or so. You know, they'd come in, flare, turn, pivot, hover, slap the hook, zip, go, gone. A few seconds later, the next one was in. And the only break we got was the fact that there was flight time from the beach to the ship, which was about a half a mile. And, you know, I don't remember the numbers about how fast they were coming in, but we usually had both helicopters running in sequence, and so as one was going out, one was coming in. And so we were just scrambling constantly all day, running our you know, our butts off, just trying to keep these things ready so the helicopters didn't have to slow down. Well, when we're doing this ship to ship, the ships are usually very close, and we could literally do a load every minute, and sometimes as fast as every 30 seconds. You know, they could hover, hook, the guy gets out of the way, they lift, they get straight up, make sure they're clear, you know, just kind of do a slow pop off, and then off they'd go. And as soon as they're out of the way, the next helicopter's coming in. And it's literally like a dance. I mean, it's like, you know, watching bumblebees work in a flower or something like that. It's just the coolest thing ever. I wish I had video to show you of it, but I'll see if I can find some sometime. And if I find a video link on YouTube or something, I'll post a link to it. But I do have some pictures that I shot, and I'm going to have to dig those out of the box and get them scanned and put them up on the website, because it's just kind of neat to see. And, you know, the first time somebody tells you this, your first thought is that they're joking. You know, who in their right mind would stand under a hovering helicopter that is so close that it hits you in the head sometimes? You know, that just doesn't make any sense to normal people. But we did it for 12 hours at a time. You know, and I broke helmets and goggles running into tires sometimes because it was dark. And you'd hook and you'd turn and you'd go to run away, and you'd run right into the tire that was hanging there because you couldn't see it because it was dark, and it would just knock you right on your butt, and you know, wake, you know, you kind of like get in a daze, and you'd kind of pick yourself up and run because you had to get across the safe line before they could lift up. And everybody was, you know, mad if you weren't running, so you'd try to run, and you get back and you'd go find a clean rag and wipe your face off, and because it was all covered with grease from the tire. And you know, get somebody to shine a light in your face and see if you were bleeding, and they're like, oh, you're not bleeding, and you know, you knew you were, but they tell you weren't, and then you go out and do it again 30 seconds later. And it was kind of fun, actually. You know, you just kind of get used to it. So